Minimalist Podcast, a space where less is more, where we strip away the noise, declutter the mind, and focus on what truly matters. I'm your host, and today we're exploring a complex yet fundamental question. Is development aid being reversed? For decades, billions have been poured into aid programs promising progress, stability, and growth, but today, cracks are showing, funding is shrinking, priorities are shifting, and some argue that rather than moving forward, we're taking steps back. Is development aid truly helping, or is it being undone by politics, economics, and shifting global interests? Let's pause, breathe, and begin.
Development aid has long been positioned as a pillar of global cooperation, a tool designed to support economic growth, reduce poverty, and stabilize fragile regions. Billions of dollars flow each year from wealthier nations and institutions to those in need, aiming to fund education, healthcare, infrastructure, and emergency relief. But something is changing. Over the past decade, we've seen a decline in commitments. Budgets are being slashed, priorities are shifting, and in some cases, the very programs that were once seen as essential lifelines are being scaled down or even dismantled. Take, for example, the Global South. Nations that once relied on development aid to build their economies are now facing new challenges. Foreign assistance is no longer a guarantee. Some donors have retracted their commitments, while others have redirected funds toward their own domestic crises. The result? A widening gap between promised aid and actual impact. But is this truly a reversal of development aid? Or is it simply a sign of evolving strategies? Are we witnessing the end of traditional aid or just a transformation into something else? Let's break this down. Where does development aid come from? Who decides how it's distributed? And what forces are shaping its To understand whether development aid is being reversed, we first need to break down how it works. Who funds it? Where does it go? And what conditions shape its impact? Development aid primarily comes from two sources: governmental aid, often managed through institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, IF, and the United Nations, and non-governmental aid, which includes charities, foundations, and private sector contributions. Official Development Assistance, or ODA, has historically been the largest financial commitment from developed nations to emerging economies. Countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and European Union members allocate a portion of their GDP to international aid. These funds are meant to finance large-scale projects, building schools, hospitals, roads, and even social programs aimed at reducing poverty and increasing economic stability. But here's the issue: the distribution of aid isn't always straightforward. Politics plays a major role. Donors often attach conditions to their financial assistance. Geopolitical interests, trade agreements, and even governance reforms become part of the package. In some cases, aid is used as leverage rather than genuine support. Then there's the question of efficiency. How much of this aid actually reaches its intended beneficiaries? A significant portion is absorbed by administrative costs, consultant fees, and complex bureaucratic processes. Some argue that aid is inefficient, too slow to respond to real-time crises, and at times more beneficial to the donors than the recipients. So, if aid is meant to help, but its mechanisms are flawed, what happens when those funds start shrinking? Are we looking at a crisis in global aid, or is it an opportunity to rethink the way we support development?
Development aid has been a cornerstone of global progress. Why are we seeing a decline? What factors are causing governments and institutions to pull back their commitments? One major reason is shifting political priorities. Countries that once championed development aid are now focusing inward. Economic slowdowns, rising inflation, and political pressures are leading many donor nations to redirect funds toward domestic challenges, whether it's healthcare, housing, or national security. Take the UK, for example. In recent years, it has reduced its ODA official development assistance from 0.7% of GNI to 0.5%, citing economic pressures. Similarly, the United States has cut foreign aid programs in key regions, particularly in Africa and the Middle East, in favor of prioritizing internal economic recovery. Then there's donor fatigue, a growing skepticism about whether aid actually works. Some policymakers argue that decades of financial assistance have not led to self-sustaining economies, but instead created dependency. The narrative is shifting from how much aid is given to how effective is it. Another major factor is geopolitical competition. Development aid has always had a strategic component. Countries use aid to expand influence, build alliances, and secure trade agreements. But today, new players are entering the game, particularly China, which is investing heavily in infrastructure projects through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, offering loans and development funds with fewer conditions than Western donors. As traditional donors pull back, new forms of financing are emerging. Private sector investment, impact investing, and blended finance models are being explored as alternatives. But are these sustainable solutions, or are we witnessing a retreat from the very principles that development aid was built on? The real question is, if development aid is declining, what replaces it? And are the countries that rely on it prepared for that transition?
Development aid declines, the effects are not just financial, they are deeply human. For many nations, these funds are not just support, they are a lifeline. So, what happens when that lifeline starts to fray? Some of the first areas to feel the impact is healthcare. Many developing countries rely on foreign aid to fund vaccination programs, maternal health services, and disease prevention initiatives. When funding is cut, access to basic medical care becomes uncertain. We've seen this play out with programs aimed at combating malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV/AIDS, many of which have suffered funding reductions, leaving millions at risk. Education is another critical area. Foreign aid often funds school infrastructure, teacher salaries, and scholarship programs. When aid declines, governments are forced to cut spending, leading to overcrowded classrooms, lack of learning materials, and fewer opportunities for students, especially in rural and marginalized communities. Then there's food security. Organizations like the World Food Program depend on international funding to deliver food aid to areas experiencing famine or conflict. But with reduced support, millions face hunger and malnutrition, deepening the crisis in vulnerable regions. Beyond the basics, development aid also plays a role in stability and governance. Many post-conflict countries rely on aid to rebuild institutions, enforce the rule of law, and foster economic development. Without this financial backing, political instability can rise, opening the door for extremist groups, corruption, and social unrest. So, while some argue that reducing aid forces countries to become self-sufficient, the reality is that many developing nations are not yet in a position to bridge the gap. The transition away from aid needs to be gradual, structured, and paired with alternative financing models. Otherwise, we risk deepening inequalities and reversing years of progress. But is there another way? Can development aid be reimagined to be more effective rather than just reduced? And what role do private sector investments and new financial models play in the future of development?
development aid is declining, does that mean global support for development is ending? Not necessarily. Instead of disappearing, aid is evolving. But how? Emerging approach is blended finance, a model where public and private investments work together. Instead of relying solely on government aid, development projects now attract funding from impact investors, banks, and businesses. This model ensures that development initiatives have both financial sustainability and measurable impact. Another shift is towards local empowerment. Instead of large-scale top-down aid programs, we're seeing more support directed towards local organizations, entrepreneurs, and grassroots movements. The idea is simple: funding projects that are led by the people who understand their communities best. Then there's the role of technology. Digital financial services, blockchain-based transparency in aid distribution, and AI-driven data analytics are helping improve efficiency and accountability in development projects. Organizations are leveraging these tools to ensure aid reaches its intended beneficiaries with minimal waste and corruption. We're also seeing a rise in South-South cooperation where developing countries support each other through trade, knowledge sharing, and regional investment. Countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America are forming new partnerships that reduce dependence on Western aid while fostering mutual growth. So while traditional aid may be shrinking, new models are emerging, but will they be enough? Are they sustainable? And do they truly serve the people who need them most? The future of development aid isn't just about money. It's about strategy, impact, and adaptation. Maybe instead of asking whether aid is being reversed, we should be asking, how can we make it work?
Where does that leave us? Development aid has long been a force for progress, but today it stands at a crossroads. We've explored how funding is shrinking, priorities are shifting, and new financial models are emerging. We've seen the real impact of reduced aid on healthcare, education, food security, and governance. And we've questioned whether the decline in aid signals a crisis or an opportunity to rethink global support. Something is clear: aid alone is not the solution. The future of development lies in smarter investments, stronger local leadership, and better global cooperation. The real question isn't just whether aid is being reversed, it's whether we are willing to reimagine it for the realities of today's world. What do you think? Is development aid still effective, or has it outlived its purpose? Let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you for joining us today on the Minimalist Podcast. This conversation is just the beginning. Development aid is a complex issue, and the answers aren't always clear. But by asking the right questions, we take one step closer to understanding what truly works. If you found this episode insightful, share it with someone who might appreciate it. Let's continue to challenge perspectives and rethink the way we support global development. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and remember, sometimes less